The secret to good accuracy is pressing the trigger and not moving the gun off target. It's an easy concept, but in practice, it's a problem for a lot of shooters. So this video will be a bit longer, where we will analyze this and the techniques connected to it in details. Don't worry, if you have short attention span and if you get bored, you can use the conveniently placed markers and skip to the part of the video that you want to see. So before going to any actual techniques, I feel like that we have to explain how the two main components actually work: the triggers and the fingers. Let's start with fingers. At this point, I could go all Travi Halis on you with fancy words like biomechanics and force vectors, but it's actually quite simple to understand. If you slept through your biology class, prepare to be amazed. You have no actual muscles in your fingers. So how do fingers work? Well, your fingers are connected with tendons here and here to certain muscle groups. And those muscles are pulling the tendons and moving your fingers. So essentially they work like a puppet, right? So this, combined with the fact that your tendons and muscles are interconnected, means that it's very hard to isolate only one finger movement, especially when you're applying a lot of force on your grip. So you can try this yourself. Relax your hand and try to move each finger by itself. If you're not trying hard, if you're not really concentrating and straightening up all other fingers, it's really hard to isolate the movement on only one finger. The other thing that you can try is tense up your muscles really hard, like you are gripping something, like a handgun, and then try to move only your trigger finger. You will see that it's really hard, and you lose a lot of movement from the front to the back, and it actually, you lose dexterity. Now, just relax your hand, make a grip, and try to move the finger again. It's easier to do, and you have more control over it. But don't worry, you don't need to know all of the specifics to be a good shooter. I just think it's good to know some of the basics before I try to explain the proper trigger press. Now let's go to the trigger. So there are a lot of different triggers out there, but we can divide them by three most common ones. So we have the single action, which you can see on some old revolvers and some competition guns, where when you press the trigger, you do one single action. You just release the hammer or striker. The second one is double action, where your trigger press is actually cocking the hammer and then releasing it. So it's completing two actions. And then we have striker fire that I will show with this green monster here. The idea is that you have a striker, and with pressing the trigger, you are only releasing the striker. Now you have a lot of different variations of this system, but essentially the most common one works as a single action. You're only releasing the striker, and then if you press the trigger again, nothing happens. Sorry, can't For our purpose, it doesn't really matter what kind of trigger you have. What matters is that you know what are the stages of the trigger and how to use it in your advantage. So more or less, the trigger has a pretravel. This is the travel that it does before it stops and actually starts to move the sear. So here, where it stops, this is the wall. From this point on, is where the trigger actually moves the sear and starts to release the hammer or striker. If the trigger still moves a bit from this point on and feels squishy or gritty, this is what we call creep. Then the trigger breaks. We want to have a very clean and distinct break. Any movement over that point is called over travel. So after you press the trigger, the gun shoots, cycles, it cocks the hammer or the striker, and then when you are releasing the trigger, it resets. Now this is different for every handgun, but in most handguns this is tactile and audible, so you can hear it and feel it. After the reset, you can press the trigger again. So why is this important? Because only after the reset you can press the trigger again. Now let's move all of this information together to move closer to our initial goal, which is pressing the trigger without moving the gun. Of course, you need a solid grip, good aim, and then you press the trigger straight back towards you. When doing this slowly and controllably, you should have no side movement of the handgun. Now the trick is to do that also faster for quick shooting. A couple of things that can help you with that. One is positioning of the trigger finger. So ideally, your trigger finger should be positioned on the trigger here, like this, in the center. But in reality, from my experience, this is not that important. I have seen really good shooters using the whole finger like this, and some other shooters using just the tip of their finger and still getting really good results. But maybe for beginners or someone that is just starting, I would suggest that you get this neutral trigger finger position, because it works with every handgun and it gives the optimal results. So this is one thing. The second thing is that when I'm shooting, I use my support hand and support hand thumb on the frame of the gun here. This helps me stabilize the gun sideways when I have to press the trigger faster. I can show it like this. So as you can see, just a natural movement of my trigger finger is moving the gun sideways. So this is the result of biomechanics that we discussed earlier. And actually, the heavier the trigger and the more force that you apply to your hand and to your finger, the more deviation will you get. But how can you counter that? Well, one option is to not tense up your hands really, really hard. You have to have a solid grip on your handgun, but don't have, that kind of dead man's grip where you put all of your muscle power into gripping the gun, because then it will be harder to have dexterity control in your finger. And the other thing, of course, is just practice, dry fire, practice, practice. What's also a very, very important part is defeating the pre-travel before you want to take a shot. So this is not trigger press. This is just me defeating the pre-travel, and this is me getting ready to fire a shot. So this is my ready position. When I get my gun out of the holster, before it's on the target, I already defeat this pre-travel. When I'm doing transitions from target to target, I'm already at this position. So this is the wall. This is the point where the trigger actually starts to release the hammer. So here I am ready, and when I want to take the shot, I only apply more pressure, and then the trigger breaks. Now, when we get the reset, now again, if I want to take another shot, if I'm shooting at one target or if I'm doing the transition, what I want to do is release the trigger quickly and get it back to this wall. So we don't want to lose any time. This is the position you want to be in when you take a shot. Trigger breaks, gun cycles, you reset immediately and again find the wall. So this is your whole trigger operation. You have to focus on it and you have to think about it all the time. Now with a lot of practice, of course, you do this subconsciously, but at least for new shooters, this is your thinking. When the gun is out of the holster, before it's on the target, you already prep the trigger. When you're on your intended target, you're already applying pressure and taking the shot off. When you fire, don't waste your time, the gun will cycle, you quickly reset and find the wall again. So you're always searching the wall, and when your sights align with the target, you just apply more pressure, take the shot off. Now, with more practice, with more shooting, you can be faster on the trigger and still hit the target. If you slap through the biologic, fuck off. We have no actual muzzle. You have no actual muzzle. If you now let's go to the trigger. So, we did this. The harder, this is not my trigger, and not so. You often forget. Fuck off. Now, what are some of the most common problems or mistakes that we see with improper trigger press? Well, especially for the new shooters, we have the flinch response. So they are still afraid of the loud bang, of the recoil. There's also some adrenaline involved, and instead of controlling their trigger finger, they usually just tense up all of the muscles and just try to squeeze the trigger as fast as possible when their sights are on the target. Of course, because they're using all of the muscles, because they're tensing, they're pushing the gun, the shot is not where it should be. A bit exaggerated, but this is how it looks. The proper trigger press should be controlled and the gun should not be moving. But what they do is they tense up everything and they move the gun. You can see this on the target with shots grouping down and to the left for right-handed shooters. For left-handed shooters, that's usually the opposite. The other similar issue that we don't see just with beginner shooters, but also intermediate shooters, is that they are starting to expect the recoil, not just being afraid of the gun, but they are expecting the gun to be recoiling back, and they are tensing the muscles, trying to push the gun down before they actually press the trigger. So it's a millisecond, but when they push the gun down just a bit before the trigger goes off, this means that their grouping will be okay, but it will be way lower than what they intended to aim and hit. I will show you some tips and techniques how to improve your trigger press at the end of this video, but first I would like to address a couple of misconceptions and things that I saw on the internet. I saw a video where an instructor uses a stick and bumps it, and that way presses the trigger for a student, which gets good hits on the target. Now, their reasoning behind this is that, oh yeah, you can just slap the trigger, that it doesn't matter, the trigger press doesn't matter, it just matters how you hold the gun. But that's not completely true, and I can show you why. We have less than average shooter here, and how, because nothing, we have a less than average, we have a below average. We have a below average shooter here, and a wooden spoon. And now I will show you how this works. So I'm slapping on the stick, I'm slapping on the trigger, and he's still hitting the target. How? Well, if you look at it, he holds the gun steady, he's always aiming at the right spot, and what I do with this perfect slap is I just press the trigger and surprise him. So he doesn't have the time to react, he doesn't have the time to move the gun, and also when I'm doing just this movement, I'm just pressing the trigger directly back. That's why this works. But I can show you how this doesn't work if you're not doing it perfectly. Let's try it again. So as you could see, if I was not pushing the trigger directly back, but also moving just a bit of his arm or his pistol, the shots are not where they should be. So this drill doesn't prove anything. But this drill can be very useful for a specific situation. For example, if I'm an instructor and I have students, a student that is not hitting the target properly, that I can see that he's doing most of the stuff correctly, but I cannot diagnose that flinch or that muscle tensing moment just before the shot because, of course, the recoil and everything. So what I can do, I get the student to hold the gun properly, aiming at the target, and I isolate the trigger press as a separate thing. So I am pressing the trigger and he doesn't know when. And I actually learned this in Brazil, in a course in Brazil that we did. And I actually used it a couple of times and it worked every time. This means that everything that he was doing wrong with the trigger is now eliminated. And if we have a better group at the target, this means that he has a problem with his trigger press. To make this video even longer, here are some tips and tricks that you can use to improve your trigger control. If you have a problem focusing on your trigger finger and you often forget about it during shooting, you can try this. Find a rough surface and rub on it. Just enough to get that tingly feeling. This will keep your mind on the trigger finger. You combine this with a drill where you're not allowed to break contact with the trigger. So how this works is that you select a target, you aim at it, and then you are not releasing the trigger. You find your wall, you're pressing the trigger, it breaks, the shot goes off, and you are not releasing the trigger. Your finger still has to be pushing the trigger, full contact. The gun will cycle, and now you consciously decide to slowly release it to find the reset, and then you press the trigger again. Now keep in mind that this is not a technique on how you shoot. This is just a drill that helps you focus on your finger and on the trigger. A more advanced exercise is where you have to shoot on command. For this you can use a shot timer, or you can use just a friend that tells you when to shoot. The key here is that you have your gun ready on the target and trigger prepped. It has to be on the wall and you have to be ready to fire. And on an audible or visual cue, the only thing you do is press the trigger as fast as possible. Of course, you have to press it properly, not moving the gun, still hit the target. But that's the whole drill, and it really pays off. We're finally at the end of this video. It was a complicated topic, and I didn't want to leave anything out. If you're also finally camel toe.
Moose knuckle.
We're finally at the end of this video. It was a complicated topic and I didn't want to leave anything out, so it's a bit longer video. Oh my god, kako neprofesionalno. Ja, on se že smeje. We're finally at the end of this video. It was a complicated topic and I didn't want to leave anything out. But if you're interested in some other elements of handgun shooting, check out the links at the end of our video. And if you made it to this far, I apologize for this selfless promotion, but please like the video, maybe comment, subscribe, whatever you do, it helps us out. And also, if you don't know already, if you're living under a rock, we are running a tactical store where we sell our swag, tactical accessories, firearm accessories, whatever. And if you buy there, you are directly supporting our channel. Thank you for watching and see you soon.
Wow. Wow.
He is subconsciously doing some issue. Oh, fuck off. This means that it's improper. Oh, fuck. Any problems with the trigger press? This means that if he was doing something wrong, the trigger press, now it will not show.
Kaj jaz delam?
Daj ti vodno, sam stoj.